Hey there, my name's Bruce. Welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm going to show you how I'm setting up my Grizzly G1033X helical head planer. It is 20 inches wide of the cutting capacity and has a helical cutting head. I didn't see a lot of videos out there about setting one of these up, so when I purchased this one, I thought it might be a good idea to put that information out there. Anyway, let's get into it. I'll show you exactly what I did. Something to note is I will be using this heavy-duty mobile base that I also bought from Grizzly. It can hold up to 1,100 pounds, I think, and it's what they recommended for this machine. You will need to set it at about 26 inches by 29 inches in order for this particular machine to fit on the mobile base in the right spot. At first, it doesn't look like it's going to go because the front of the machine is kind of curved, so you're wondering how it's going to fit down in the mobile base, but it fits just fine. Just like many other machines, this thing ships on a big pallet, and this one was not bolted down to the pallet, so it wasn't that difficult to remove. I actually just popped the end off of it because it had a lip that set up a little bit higher, and then I had some friends that actually helped me with this, so 4 of us lifted this off of the pallet and onto the mobile base. It was still pretty heavy. I think it weighs over 800 pounds by itself. The good thing is it has these pull-out forklift holds, strap holds, or whatever, and this was before I put on the infeed and outfeed tables, so we were able to just pull these handles out. Each of us grabbed one and set it down onto the mobile base. The bad thing about this machine is that it weighs a ton, and it is a little hard to get down on the mobile base. The good part is a ton of it already comes pre-assembled, and there's not a lot to do once it gets to you. But I'm going to show you the few things that you do have to do and walk you through what I did. Off camera, I threaded on the knob to this wheel. It has a spacer and then also a nut to tighten down so that the handle can turn freely, but it's not going to loosen itself over time. There is a keyway in this post that holds the wheel on as well as into the actual wheel. So you have to find the tiny key and get it into the slot and then turn this wheel to line up so that it will slip right on there. Then there is a nut that you tighten down with an included wrench after that. Next up, it was time to remove the Cosmoline, which is all of that shipping oil and grease that they send on the machines. It was under this plastic wrap, so luckily it did not just get absolutely everywhere. But my method for this in the past has just been to wipe off all the excess, clean it really good with something like WD-40, and then come back with paste wax or something to seal the cast iron. This time I'm going to be trying T9 Bow Shield. They sent me a sample of their stuff to try out, so I'm still just cleaning off the excess Cosmoline with a paper towel. I'm going to cut it with some WD-40 just to make sure all of that excess oil is off of there, wipe it nice and clean, and then apply the Bow Shield. It's the same situation for both of the cast iron infeed and outfeed tables. I haven't attached these yet. I wanted to get them nice and cleaned up while they could be separate and over sitting on my workbench. So that's part of why I really like this machine, is that it has these solid infeed and outfeed tables. They're really heavy, and you'll see they're a little bit difficult to get aligned and attached, but I'm glad that they're there. The instructions for using this T9 Bow Shield could not be simpler. You basically just spray it on, leave it for a couple of seconds, use a paper towel or a cloth to wipe it all around to make sure it has coverage, and then you wipe off the excess. This stuff does a really good job to protect against rust, and it helps your wood material and pieces slide really easily on the cast iron. Here I'm just going back with a clean cloth to make sure that all of that excess is removed and everything looks smooth and feels smooth. Then I head back over to the actual planer bed and do the same to it. Alright, everything's looking really good. Let's move on to the next steps. I did all of this by myself, but here's the part that it would not be a bad idea to have a friend to help you or someone to just give you a hand. These infeed and outfeed tables are quite heavy, and while obviously you can accomplish it by yourself, because I did it, it would make it a lot easier if someone else was there just to hold it up while you tighten some of the bolts. But if you are going to do this by yourself, here's how I did it, and I think it would work pretty well for you also. There are 3 bolts that secure the infeed table to the actual planer bed, and I started with just one of them, getting it secure, obviously not all the way tight, but just tightened enough that it could support the weight of that infeed table. Then it allowed me to be able to swing the other side up, kind of like a hinge, and attach the other 2 bolts underneath. Again, this gets pretty tedious after a while because this table is heavy and it's kind of awkward to hold up in this certain way to make sure that you can get that bolt to line up through both of the holes. I found it helpful to move the table up and down as I hand tightened all 3 of these bolts. It just allowed a little bit of movement, and I was able to get a little more and a little more tightness into these bolts. You do not want to fully secure them at this time. Here are the locations for these actual bolts. I wanted to show you on the underside where exactly they go. On this particular model, it has 3 small set screws just below each of the bolt holes. Go ahead and place those in the hole, and they will help us get the tables aligned and flat later. I struggled with this first table, getting it on and leveling it for probably a good 45 minutes. So let me tell you a couple of things that I figured out that will hopefully save you some time installing these. Those set screws that we added a few minutes ago actually help adjust the outside edge of the table up or down once you get it pretty well secured. I thought this was kind of a catch-all and they would totally adjust all of the table, but you really need to make sure where the bed of the planer and the actual edge of this infeed table meet is as level as you can get it before you ever start messing with the set screws. I found it to be a good bit more finicky than originally thought. And once you get it dialed in up here where the 2 tables meet, you can dial these in and it will actually raise or lower basically the outside of this table. However, I did find that you have to get pretty close right here at the 2 tables where they meet. And I had to kind of use my shoulder to hold it up there and tighten the bolts mostly by hand, maybe even a couple cranks with the wrench, and then actually fine tune it by tapping it with a dead blow hammer a couple times up or down so that I could get the perfect edge here. And I've got this dialed in just about perfect. I mean, I can't even really see any light anywhere in between. So yeah, on the outfeed table, I got it down to about a 15-minute process. It was not that difficult at all. I actually learned that you needed to crank the bolts tight to where they were tight enough to hold if you would bump them with a dead blow mallet or something like that, but not so tight that you couldn't make the adjustments with the set screw if you needed to. Moving on. Okay, now it's time to get the dust chute all set up. This is a matter of just a few screws that go into the housing of the actual planer. And the dust port on this thing is a 5-inch dust port. So I actually bought a reducer to reduce it from 5-inch to 4-inch, but I'll show you that a little bit later. Here's a shot from the underside of that dust chute, just showing you a few of those bolts that you have to tighten down just to make sure that that dust chute is nice and secure. And look at that gorgeous cutter head just peeking out from behind there. One of the other really important things that the manual tells you to do before you ever fire up this machine is check the level of the gearbox oil. So here you see me undoing the fill port of the gearbox. That will not cause oil to spew out of there unless somehow you have filled this over full. But you undo this bolt and you take one of the Allen keys and you stick the short end in there, and you should be able to get some of the gearbox oil on that short Allen key. If you do not, it goes through some instructions about the different weight of oil, gear oil, that you should use to put back in there. Luckily, mine just got on the edge of it, so everything was good. The machine ships with a NEMA L6 30 amp plug, so you will need a receptacle that can handle that, and then obviously you will need a 30 amp breaker, which is what they recommend. Like I mentioned earlier, the dust port is a 5-inch dust port. I actually picked up a reducer just from the home goods store that was a 5 to 4-inch reducer because all of the flex hose that I have is 4-inch. I'll be doing a more permanent setup in the future, but for now I have a dust collector that is plenty strong to handle this even in a 4-inch capacity because this thing is only sitting less than 6 feet from my dust collector. When I went to add the hose clamp around the reducer, there was just too much slop there. I needed to take up that gap somehow. So I grabbed a little bit of this foam tape that I have and put it around the port just to expand that a little bit. I actually ended up having to go back later and take off about half of it because then it was too large to even get the reducer fit on there. But I got it fit on there and now the hose clamp can tighten down on it really well. As I mentioned, this is just a temporary dust collection setup. I will be doing something more permanent in the future, but for now, this will work. At this point, I've done everything that the manual says. It's time to test out the machine, see how everything works. Let's fire it up, let's see how it does, and hope that everything feeds through there right. I hope to not have to do a bunch more adjustments. All right, it says to turn this. Okay, so the e-stop came out, the light came on. Now, all sounds good. All right. One thing that the manual does say to check is once you push this in, which should stop it, try starting it again and it should not start. So it did not. That means the switch is functioning properly and I'm happy about that. So I think it's time to run some boards through this. Let's try doing the first cuts on some highly figured maple. This has a ton of curl in it and curl likes to tear out. So this side needs cleaning up. I mean, I can't just run a 2x4 through it for the first time. Come on, really? Let's do it. I don't know if you can see it, but just turning it on that time, there are little droplets of oil, I guess from the cutter head, that it just slung all over the table. So I'm sure some of that will work itself out as it goes, but that was interesting. Maybe I picked a bad piece because this one has a lot of wormholes in it, but I don't see any tear out from the actual curly grain. So ran it through there a few passes, much quieter than my last planer that had straight knives. And overall, I'm pretty happy. Dust collection seemed to do pretty well. We see a few chips here. I had just swept the floor. There's nothing behind it on the table because it all collected, went in there. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Once I permanently pipe this, I think it's going to do really well. I don't see anything on the floor. Well, I ran a few passes and I don't really see any snipe that is happening on this. So I'm not going to mess with any of the adjustments. There are some adjustments you can make to this machine that will change the rollers and the position of all of the stuff underneath that basically makes it work. I watched a really good video before I set this one up as far as adjusting that stuff in case your machine was out. So I'll link to that one below. If you need to know how to do that, I would say go watch that video. It's a really good video about how to adjust all of the tiny little, finite things. That's really it about this one. The setup was pretty easy, a little bit challenging to get the cast iron infeed and outfeed tables on there and level, but once I did, everything's running really well, and I'm liking it. I think I'm gonna get a lot of use out of this machine. If you have other things that you've come across with this machine or with something similar, leave them in the comments below so that other people can learn from it. That's always helpful. If you found this video useful, consider subscribing to the channel. That way you don't miss any of my future videos. I've got some more videos over here that you might like. Consider checking some of those out. And thanks so much for watching. See you on the next one.